McKenna with a low dart. Did anyone touch it? No, they didn't.
Brisbane getting a little lucky, I reckon, with the 250s, because right at the moment for mine, Sydney are the most committed physical team out there by a long way.
Fletcher on debut. Kick a goal, young man. There we are.
Robinson to Danaher. Danaher left foot snap goal. Had to wear them down eventually.
Dangerous tackle.
Oh, slim tackle.
I'm reporting you for rough conduct.
Fletcher did well. Kept it in, did brilliantly well. Rayner. Oh, young fella, take a bow. Back to Bailey. Busts his way through. And that is a big, big goal. A necessary win this for the Brisbane Lions. It's a box they needed to tick, and they have.
Back on the winners list after a couple of poor performances, although it wasn't the most convincing win. As they do say, a win is a win. Good to be back at the Gabba. Good to get the 4 points, and good to feel a little bit more upbeat this time. I was quoted as saying that last week's intro sounded a little bit like a eulogy, and that probably had a little bit to do with being slightly hungover, pretty upset with the game, and just general disgruntlement was the word I used last week. But hopefully this week's a little bit better for all Lions fans out there. The Brisbane Lions fancast is back because we're fans again. And, of course, so is Patrick. Thanks for coming back, mate.
I just want to make note that I did offer to do the podcast later last week because I knew your predicament. So you wanted to self-sabotage, I think. But this week it seemed like the people's lineup axe had swung and new dawns were on the horizon. But problems with the performance, but the win was good. Are you reading your notes off of some map?
It's off the back of a shopping list that we had.
I thought it was like a map of like Tahiti or Vanuatu or something, and was expecting you to make an escape. But anyway, crack on.
No, sir. Props to you, because we put out the changes last week, and we had your changes, my changes, and what you dubbed the people's changes. And the people's changes were almost spot on. You had all the outs: Rich Gardner, Gunston, Pryor, and McCluggage. You had coming in Lohman, Zorko, Coleman, Fort, and Ryan Lester. But the only difference was Jasper Fletcher came in instead of Zorko. So 5 changes with no Zorko, who accordingly was had a little bit of calf awareness. So the extra week off for Zorks, maybe back next week, but we'll get to the changes later because it's going to be tough. And Cal Archie is the sub.
It's interesting. The people's lineup had spoken. Just to pat myself on the back, I had mentioned Fletcher getting in the team in weeks prior.
Yep.
And I thought that he'd get a game in the season. So, it was pretty wild because I think we thought that was beyond kind of the realms of possibility. We know that the selection panel aren't really the type to make bulk changes. But here we are. I think it needed to be done. And I think, as you said, if we can see it, surely they can.
Yeah.
So credit to the selection group. Or
there was obviously a fair bit made about the selection with the news coming out late in the week that Daniel Rich and Jack Gunston had, in inverted commas, dropped to themselves. And that obviously caused a little bit of furor, not just amongst Lions supporters, but I guess AFL fans around the traps. I guess the integrity around those selections and those conversations that were had. You've given yourself a pat on the back. I might give myself one. Anyone involved in our Brisbane Lions fancast Discord would know that I, Tom Morris style, broke that news 24 hours before it came to light.
The slimy tendrils of the Brisbane Lions fancast, they get in and amongst it somehow. But yeah, it was good. I think there was a bit of chit chatter about like, why are the players bringing it to themselves to drop themselves and not have the sort of the coaching staff or whatever do that for them, power to whomst in this situation. But I think, you played me just before we came on air because I missed it because I was too busy not watching 40 minutes before the game. Fagan's interview with Gary Lyon before the game where he sort of said, look, we were all aware of it. And it was kind of, if not that had been done, then they probably wouldn't have played anyway. So,
yeah, he gave a fairly comprehensive answer to the question that was asked of him, and a really nice insight into the way the conversation went down and the ongoing conversations with players that happened. So I think he sort of put any of those weird rumours to bed, hopefully.
But I did kind of like the idea of those rumors being there for a few days, just
Yep.
to kind of like, just to sort of let people talk and maybe take a bit of focus off some of the other things. But I tell you what, kind of about midway through the second quarter, I was like, oh God, these changes have not worked. So yeah, as we said, going into the game, we had Loman, Leicester, Fort, and then Fletcher playing his first game. So, big story, an old Bears fella. So,
Yeah.
one from my era of sitting at that. I don't know if you remember or if you kind of have watched enough of the old games, but we used to go and watch the Bears play, but we'd sit in that really, really awful triangular, small ground level section of seating below the social club. And there was a fence kind of above where we used to sit where all of the old clubbers would just like rest all their beers on.
Nice.
So it didn't matter what time of the year, but it was like Dad would be like, "Oh, you got to bring your raincoats because you just get showered in beer." And it's like sort of 5, 6 year old going to the games. Like,
Is that when the dog track was still around the outside of the field as well?
No. So it was after that. So this is probably as far back as I remember, probably like 95, 96 would be the earliest I remember. But yeah, definitely like. So if you're watching the old videos, it's kind of the way the broadcast is facing, but like kind of off to the left. And yeah, it's like this really weird triangular set of seats that's like really low with a brick wall above it.
Sure.
I can only imagine those seats cost about 3 shillings or something like that at the time. But yeah, so definitely remember watching Adrian Fletcher running around in the old days. So yeah, that's my little anecdotal nonsense. But
Well, I sat next to Adrian Fletcher at the 2019 semi-final against GWS. And I was stoked. I was like, oh, beauty. Like, not only is my team playing finals for the first time in 10 years, I'm sitting next to Adrian Fletcher, and Jasper was there next to him. And I was like, oh, so is your son playing? And he's like, oh, yeah, he's in the academy. He plays for Sherwood as well. And just sort of gave him a bit of a wave. And I was like, I hope to see you out there one day. And here we go. There he is, kicking goals.
Had he not had that
sweet little pep talk.
Oh God, Sherwood.
Yeah.
Hated playing Sherwood as a junior in under nines. Oh God.
Look at us, just old cobbers chatting footy. Hey, First quarter, not a lot to be happy about. Sydney bloody brought the pressure. Hey, tackle after tackle, stoppage after stoppage, and a lot of the same problems from last week sort of reared their head again. Like the way that Sydney moved the ball, it seems so easy for them if they wanted to just get it out of their back 50, switch the play, shoot it down the middle, and they had the ticket out if it wasn't a stoppage. So a little bit of Concernicus in the first quarter.
Yeah, I think I sent you a message that just said this is gross.
Yes,
and that was kind of like the summation of that period of my life. Yeah, it wasn't good. It seemed like not a lot had really happened. The forward group weren't gelling. They haven't really gelled for a while. It was interesting because talking kind of early on in the season, we were sort of saying like, oh, it's great, like multiple goal kickers, everyone's kind of pulling their weight, doing good stuff. It probably reads a little bit different in hindsight looking at it now because you've got kind of like more or less most of them kicking goals anyway. But like, it just seems functionally like something's kind of not working for that group. For the first half, it sort of seemed like Hipwood was the only real dangerous forward, and his goal kicking, whilst pure, was not online.
Yeah, that's my fault. Last week on the podcast, I said, I trust Rick the most as our set shot goal kicker, and he missed his first two, and I was like, oh no, I've done him here.
But as I said, they were good kicks. They were ones where you're like, that looks really good off the boot, and it's just they were just either they were hard shots or whatever. But yeah, he seemed weird. He's almost like he's taken that. I think Dermot Brereton saying it probably like 3 or 4 years ago. Like he's like a really tall forward flanker, and it's like he's almost taken that and run with it literally.
Yeah.
Because man, that guy is running and tackling hard, but he looked dangerous. Cunningham played on Charlie Cameron and probably more on him a bit later on, but I don't think I've seen Chuck blanketed like that.
Yeah. I mean,
since like the old Dylan Grimes era.
Yeah, I think the closest Andy McGrath probably a few weeks ago came just as close, but Harry Cunningham, like props to him. Chuck's had a couple of quiet weeks. I mean, he's sort of flown under it because he had a good stretch of games, but he's had a couple of quiet weeks for sure.
There was a moment I think where he made a kind of pressure act sort of towards where the bench were, and Link McCarthy was on the bench and kind of like, you know, sort of in like a positive reinforcement way, like really got into Charlie and just like, you know, keep going. Like, so it's quite clear that the metric for those two is like, you know, keep the pressure on. Link McCarthy had 3 tackles inside 50 across the game, so that was impressive, you know. And it is kind of like what I said regarding Hipwood sort of before, would have been probably the Adelaide game, I say. When did he kick 4? Hawthorn.
Yeah.
So before that, where I sort of said like, everyone's kind of damaging and dangerous on their own, so it's kind of ignore them at your own peril. But you'd like to see a little bit more like of them as a unit, because in the first half, like, you know, Danaher wasn't really anywhere. Fort looked like playing the Gunston role is a bit more difficult than it seems. Who would have thought? Lohman seemed a bit anonymous in the first half, and then Link and Charlie. So there wasn't really a great deal of goal threat coming from our actual forwards. It changed in the second half.
Just to touch quickly on Joe and Fort, like the big, not concern, but we always said when Fort came in, what's that going to do for Joe's rucking, because he plays his best football as a second ruck, and it looks like in the first half, Fort was just a pure forward, and Joe was still taking the second ruck duties, and that looks like, because Fort was a little bit rusty in the first half, it looks like they said, all right, well, Darcy, you get in the second ruck and play that position, you know, you naturally play to try and get you involved in the game a little bit more. He inevitably ended up getting subbed off, so it was interesting the way they sort of did that. They just played Darcy Ford as a pure forward.
It's just kind of like what they did in the gather round game,
yeah,
where they had the 3 of them, although different, well, you know, different quality of opposition. But yeah, it does seem like that third tall, and people are going to, you know, question whether we need a third tall. It's going to be great until who's the chap from Wilkie decides to have a blinder next week if we don't have a third tall. So yeah, it seems like that third tall, whether it is Gunston, whether it has been McStay, I think McStay is probably like, previous to obviously him not being in the team, has done that selflessly and consistently enough so that it's probably like provided a bit of an unrealistic expectation or something like that in terms of how that role is played. So yeah, interesting to see that, you know, although Gunston hasn't made an impact and all of that hubbub about that, Fort didn't exactly improve that in this game. So, but sort of midway through the second quarter, I think Froggy copped one in the chops, and that was a bit of a turning point for you.
Yeah, I wrote it down. As soon as he got murdered by Sam Wicks, I said, I wonder if that'll be the catalyst to really just like switch the boys on and go, all right, let's pull our fingers out and get going. And I think we got the rub of the green from the umpires, especially in the first half. So there was a little bit of ill discipline from Sydney, as John Longmire touched on, but that really got us back into the game. A couple of goals from some 50s and some free kicks, especially that out of bounds, that deliberate out of bounds that saw Jared Berry just mung one through on his left, where previously Darcy Wilmot literally walked the ball over the line and Sydney couldn't buy themselves a free kick there. So I thought that was a little bit, I don't know, unjust in that sort of way, but it worked to our benefit, and we got going, and then, as the stats will show, we absolutely dominated from sort of halfway through that second quarter. Inside 50s, clearances, contested possessions, we were all like plus 20 on most of those metrics. Just couldn't put it on the board again. 13-19 in the end, 3 goals, 8 in the third quarter.
When's the last time you've seen sort of 4 50-metre penalties paid, like, you know, against the teams? It doesn't happen very often, but 3 of them are there. One of them isn't for me. That sort of second weird grabby one by Barker, was it? I mean, that's not much in there, but kind of a bit similar to the Jack Payne one that made Fagan have a...
Well, that's just silly. It's like
bleeding out aneurysm, But yeah, like Papley running across the mark. You got the 2 late hits, the one on Berry that got his first goal. Little shout out to Jared Berry. I thought he was like, I don't think he's had a bad season. I've seen a lot of people say he hasn't played a good game since the second half in the elimination final against Clayton Oliver. I don't agree with that categorically. I think he's had a down couple of weeks, and he's an easy person with his body language and his weird vacant face to kind of pin a lot of criticism on, you know. He's been a very solid contributor over the course of this season, and he's like stood up in in games that it's need to be stood up. Like that's my opinion, but I don't think that he's deserved the criticism that he's got over the last couple of weeks. Payne had a bit of trouble with his ankle.
Yeah,
It looked a bit ominous.
That's we really need him for next week as well with Max King in the lineup, because as we've seen, Max King can get a hold of Harris Andrews with his his height and his athleticism. So we need Jack Payne to take that match up, and if that ankle sort of hangs around throughout the week, then it could be bad news for us.
The other thing, so if the hit on Froggy was kind of the ignition, I feel like the rev of the engine was Jasper Fletcher's first goal. That really kind of brought it. It felt like it made the team feel like they were a team again, almost like they all got around him. Everyone was like really up and about, and that seemed to sort of change the complexion of like the emotional state of the team rather than being it just seemed to change something. So that was really important.
And then when Cammy put through his goal in his 100th game as well, they sort of got around him as well. How about that hanger though in the first quarter from about 4 deep? Yeah. It's a shame. It's a shame he didn't convert that one, because that really would have ignited something early on.
It was funny that he more or less took that off over Fort as well, which is kind of funny about it. That was a great mark, budget eyewear mark of the week. So, but yeah, interesting stuff in that sort of first half. Going in leading. We went in leading last week, and I was kind of sort of sitting there going, I talked about a false economy in terms of how we do tend to have these purple patches in games, which now seems to be widely kind of known.
Yep.
Talked about Hutto mentioning it on First Crack a few weeks ago, or someone, I can't remember who, whatever. It's just saying you can't have a bad 5 minutes. You can have a bad 5 minutes, providing the remainder of the 1 hour and 55 minutes of the remainder of the game you're playing better. So be that as it may.
If you've got a mate that loves the Lions, tell them to get the podcast into their ear holes.
As you said, second half, much higher in terms of centre clearances, general clearance, contested possession, that sort of thing. So statistically looks like a much bigger win than it was, but it wasn't. Bit of inaccuracy, hey?
That, and combined with the fact that Sydney's kicking is obviously one of their strengths, and it's like their shots on goal. Like Braden Campbell kicking a football is quite nice to watch, especially that one.
Did that fella that just kicked it from like Daniel Rich range?
Yeah, that was yeah, and that Sheldrick, like his first goal from about 50 out on his right, then moments later set shot on his left, both went straight through. So
what the hell kind of name is Sheldrick?
I like it.
It's this is combining Sam Sheldon and me. That's a sitcom no one ever needs to hear of. Yeah, I mean, they were talking about it on the horror show that was the broadcast, but just the optics of a left footer. This will tie in a little bit later, but a raking left foot at the Gabba. What a sight to behold! Yeah, we've had I'll talk about that a bit later on. Little sneaky. Yeah, it seemed to be there was a period of the game where we were working pretty bloody hard for goals, and then they were just nabbing a centre clearance and going and kicking an immediate response. I don't know if that was first quarter or second quarter or third quarter. It seemed to be all quarters.
Yeah, they just wouldn't go away.
No, and I suppose for a team that had played in the grand final last year, what even is the competition if that's the case? So
give Sydney a bit of a cop out here. They are missing some big names either end of the ground. Like their tall defence is all gone. Both McCartans are out, and then on the other side you've got Franklin out, who's not necessarily the game breaker that he once was, but Logan McDonald out of that team as well. So you have a couple of those key position players in, combined with Heaney and Mills as well, and then it's a different game.
Yeah, and I think Heaney's sort of someone that tends to play pretty well. I thought O did a really good job on Hickey, because Hickey seems to play pretty well against us. I remember the round one game a few years ago. Hickey was outstanding. The bearded Sasquatch. So more on that a bit later on as well. But yeah, so the second half, Zach Bailey played a bit more through the middle. He played more through the middle throughout the game, but he seemed to simplify his game a little bit and just be like, get the ball, run it forward and kick it. It led to a man of the match thing on Fox Footy, which I didn't buy into personally. But, it's interesting because we talked about him and having like his goal threat and goal sense around the ground. And like since then, he's kicked like 3 out of bounds on the full and kicked 5 behinds or something. It's like, come on, man.
Yeah, his decision making has been questionable. And he did it again this week. He went the hack off the ground, missed, ended up standing on the ball and falling over, which is what I pointed out last week. He took it to a new level this week. But yeah, once he got in the middle, yeah, he sort of started doing that stuff we know Zach Bailey can do, hitting contests at pace. And there was one in the forward half where it was vintage Zach Bailey, comes in, sharks the tap and hits it at pace. And, you know, he used to just like convert that 9 times out of 10, but he sprayed it this time. But yeah, there was some signs of some good footy from Zach Bailey after a pretty frustrating first half.
What I'll say though, yeah, it definitely was a frustrating first half. Yeah, the one where he missed the kick off the ground, stood on the ball and fell over was like, you know, that could be on comedy classics. But 6 tackles, that's probably as many, or, you know, that's a lot for him. Particularly recently, we've seen kind of like his work in the contest has been kind of less than, you know, it's been weird this year. We've seen a lot of fending, a lot of pushing off, that sort of thing.
What did you make of, now obviously the results came through fairly like soon after, but the Jared Berry reported on the night for the rough tackle. I mean, to the eye, and especially to Jared Berry, it wasn't a reportable offence. It was a footy act. But, you know, we've seen this year, that's the sort of stuff that can get you weak. So, while most footy fans, I guess the pub test would say, nah, that's just a good tackle. His arms got free by the time he hit the ground. There was a little bit of head movement. I don't know if it actually hit the ground, his head, but it was certainly close enough that I wouldn't have been surprised if he got a week for that, but it was just dismissed immediately, which was kind of a surprise with the way things have been going in the AFL.
Yeah, well, it kind of goes back to the Brockman one from probably 6 or 7 weeks ago, where he got a week having not pinned any arms and didn't take it to tribunal. There was 3 in that weekend that went to 3 suspensions in whatever week that was, and 2 went to tribunal that both didn't get overturned, and the one, which was the Brockman one, which is one where he didn't pin any arms and got a week, should have gone, because that should have set a precedent for this kind of thing going forward. So I thought, because I didn't think either arm was pinned. I know they said the ball carrying arm was, but it kind of wasn't. It didn't really make any sense. But both arms are not pinned. So that, to me, is duty of care taken care of. So.
I guess there wasn't really a definitive second motion as well. It was all sort of one momentum. But like I said, just with the way things are going, I wouldn't have been surprised if that was looked at a little bit more harshly. But the fact that it was just thrown out was a good and welcome, but it was surprising.
It's funny because I think we might have talked on the podcast. It might have you know, been a cutting room floor situation, but we were talking about players most likely to first get done for a dangerous tackle. And I said my partner,
yes,
she had said Jared Berry. I'd said Kadeen Coleman because of his like cat claws and like the propensity for a sling motion. So she won the chocolates, although it didn't go suspension. It was still the first reported offence. So she wins. I don't know what she wins, but there you go.
I'll leave that up to you too. I was thinking throughout the week, because it has been, I guess the Sicily tackle has been a pretty big point of conversation on 360 in the couch and SEN and whatever. It's been the hot topic of the week, and they keep flashing up the list of players that have been suspended. There's been 29 reports, 21 suspensions, something like that. I've probably got those numbers wrong, but I was like, you know, we've done well as a club to not lose anyone to suspension so far with anything like that. So whether that was me thinking that got us in the spotlight, but yeah, it was good to get away with it is probably not the phrase you should be using, but yeah, it was.
Well, good if you take Dane Zorko out of the team over the past sort of 3 years, you've probably taken or him and Mitch Robinson over the past 6 years. That's 95% of our suspensions. So, you know, make of that it was what you will. You know, you can see in the Jared Berry one that he doesn't pin an arm. He has an arm pinned and he lets it go. That's kind of all you need to do.
Yeah.
So I don't know. The Sicily one, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, like, it doesn't really matter. It's not going to change anything because there's still going to be a massive debate about it. And like, I don't think with all of these ones, it's the one that's like, I've talked about the Will Day Hawthorn one from way back when. It's like, that's a tackle that'll happen until the end of time. You know, where someone latches on and the momentum of the ball carrier takes them through. And then Brad Close had a really similar one where he tackled someone and the tackler's momentum got him hit the ground and got a week. And it's like, they're different to the ones that are kind of where someone goes in to kind of like to brutalize. And you can tell by Sicily's body language, the way he pushes off, the way he kind of like wanted to make a statement that he wasn't going in to try and concuss someone, but he was going in to try and what did Stevie J say back to make him earn it, sort of thing. So I don't know. You can't really do that anymore.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens today when he heads to the appeals board, but I don't expect much to change.
Get in touch anytime. Shoot us an email at blfancast@gmail.com or join the Discord.
All right, before we get to votes, is there anything else you want to chat about the game? I think we sort of touched on most of the key areas. Just like a lot of...
I suppose just Jasper Fletcher really grew into the game. Same, Kyle Lohmann also grew into... I did kind of give a bit of a hard time. It's the first half for a lot of the players coming in. So Fletcher could have ended up with 3 goals. If he'd ended up with 3 goals, then that's a Rising Star nomination right there. Loehmann's little dart to Dev Robertson was really good. Poor fella can't get his first goal. And you made mention before we started, just, we hope Dev Robertson doesn't come out of the team because he's been playing really well. Hasn't obviously he's not going to play the same way he plays in the reserves, but he's been kind of really important, I think. And I would hate to see him go out of the team at this point in time.
The changes are going to be difficult when we come to the team in a couple of minutes' time. But of the people that came in, I'm sort of loath to drop any of them. I thought Fort was the only one that didn't really get a pass mark. I thought Lohmann, Fletcher, Coleman coming back in was good, and I'm having Frog over Dizzy now. Yeah. That's enough for me to just go, Frog it's Frog's spot to lose now. Best 22 for me.
Yeah, well, it just seems like, Gardner doesn't quite have the leg speed that he used to. And if he does, then he tends to blow out a quad, apparently. So whether it was a quad or not, we'll never know. I'm trying to think, there's not too much other stuff. It's hard to, the team aren't obviously firing on all cylinders, but it's hard to sort of see, just sort of defensive sins, kind of team not setting up quick enough, things like that. It's all really frustrating, but it's all kind of almost been done to death on the back of the Hawthorn game. So I guess we'll just leave that for now. But votes, where have you got it? The kind of the popular opinion was sort of that Neil and Bailey were the 2 best on ground, but not for me.
Yeah, I think Neil was. He had a very similar game to last week, although his output was so much better. You could tell he wanted to defend a little bit more. Still probably not to the level of a Josh Dunkley, but disposal efficiency, he wasn't just blasting it down the middle like he did last week. Disposal efficiency at above 90% for 29 touches is pretty bloody good. He spent 90% of the time on ground, so he will get my 3, Big O the 2, and Harry Cunningham's getting 1 because that's to do that to Charlie Cameron, and you could see it was visible, the look on Charlie Cameron's face when he took that mark with 2 minutes left. He was like, "Oh, thank God, I've got a touch." Sprayed the goal in the end, but I guess the good thing about that whole thing was you could see not only in years gone by would that really just blow Chuck out and his head would drop and he just wouldn't start playing team footy. He'd get in his own head, but you could see the respect that he sort of had for the performance of Cunningham as well. There was just you got me today, well done. So yeah, Cunningham gets my 1. I thought he was fantastic.
Yeah, neato. I had Big O with 3 because it just... the way that Hickey's kind of gotten a hold of us a couple of times, and I found it difficult to find a best on ground. I didn't really think anyone was best on ground, to be honest.
Yeah. You could have wrapped it up.
I know that's probably a little bit weird. I gave Cunningham 2, and I gave... who did I give 1? I'll give it to Neil. Why not? He's had too many votes. I'll give it to Berry. Why not? He had 2 goals, and also he's important. He's more important than people think.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. Berry vote. Would you say that... And I wonder if it's coming off the back of that Essendon game that people have seen the blueprint of how to sort of outwork us, because we had that Carlton game where we managed to lock it in. We touched on this last week. We managed to lock it in, get repeat entries, blocking off the handball receives and keep it in. But then Essendon sort of came in, put the extra behind the ball, and were able to transition it out of their back 50 a little bit easier. Then we saw Gold Coast try it. I said Darcy McPherson sort of played that role as well. Ballard was having a good game. Then the Crows, then Hawthorn, all able to transition it. Well, Crows a little bit different. We did get a lot of repeat entries, especially in that third quarter. We just didn't capitalise on it. But Hawthorn definitely, the way they moved the ball. And then Sydney, there was flashes of it as well. Is the blueprint out there on how to just play well against us, take our game a little bit, and move the ball out of our forward 50 a bit easier?
Yes and no. The thing is, it's still the onus is still on us to make up the number. If they're going to drop one in, why? Like, we don't need to be putting one behind the stoppage. So which is something that they highlighted that we had been doing on clearance and stuff like that, having someone sort of not even behind the stoppage. So it's weird. The way we've been setting up hasn't been, in my opinion, very effective. Because the idea of sitting someone like, I think what they're doing is they're trying to cater for that just sort of looped handball forward. So previously, in days gone by, you'd set someone up a kick behind the ball. Now it's almost like they're setting someone up a handball behind the ball, which is weird because what happens is it requires a lot of discipline from the player, either to not get sucked into the contest or to drop back, anticipating the kick. And being as close as a handball to the contest is like, it's enticing. It's really good. Like, I could be the extra number here, the Nick Dacos of the contest, to get the ball and go. Do we need to do that, or should we trust our midfielders to be able to win the contest and not be left with an outnumber when we win the contest to go forward? That's kind of where the problem has been, where they've been dropping one and we've not really been going to that. It's mind-boggling when you hear people say, like, should we go, we've gone from 4 talls, having Danaher, Fort, Hipwood, Gunston, and O at times, so 4.5, 4 with a ruck. 3 with a ruck, people are saying we should go 2 with a ruck. It's like, if the thing that we're getting beaten by is kind of that element of an outnumber going inside 50, the contested mark's kind of pretty important. So I don't know what necessarily to do with it, but it's about sort of making, I mentioned last week we needed to make Sicily accountable for what he was doing. And next week we're going to have to make Wilkie accountable for what he does. And that sort of thing. So it's like,
not only that they've got Jack Sinclair, who's having a fantastic season as well, playing halfback and then drifting through the middle as well. So if we can do a similar job on him that we did with Sard, and we can negate Wilkie to a degree, I think that's going to go a long way to getting a win.
I think with Sinclair as well, he's one that you got to anticipate the fact he'll play halfback and then he'll crop up in the mids in the second half, right?
Yeah.
So he'll start attending centre bounces and stuff. So whether or not that's kind of a bit of a poker game that Ross Lyon's playing with that, of saying like, if you plan for it and plan to have your guy going with him. But I think that's a really good example with the Sard thing. But yeah, it's a matter of, I suppose, if you're outnumbered, they're always going to have an extra player, and then you're expecting. I guess maybe that's why they're kind of treating Cameron and McCarthy, the idea of like, yeah, you two are athletic enough and you have enough pressure to go 2-on-3 in that sort of element. Maybe that's the trade-off that they're trying to do, but it hasn't really been working.
No, so that sort of tactic you're talking about with the loop handball out the back is, I think that does work well against a team like Collingwood, who often look for that handball, and maybe that's what we're setting up for, is to play against the best teams, and if it works against others, then great. But we might drop the odd game here or there. But if we're training to play against the Collingwood come finals time, because we know that works and we've seen it work, maybe there's something to be said for there. But I don't know if that's the case.
I don't necessarily think that the idea of having someone dropped into that hole is, although it's like, as I said, it requires a lot of discipline to do, I don't think it's that difficult. Like, I know I've completely kind of gone against what I just said, but like, it's not the sort of thing that you need to like train system-wise to then be able to pull out against Collingwood. So even then, I still think that our mids can go toe-to-toe with Collingwood, and I think that there's other ways around it, and we'll figure that out in a few rounds' time when we play them. But I don't think you necessarily need to be setting up against, say, like, the last 2 or the last 3, which are generally lateral movers and kick movers. It's kind of making that redundant. And then the idea is that you're a player down on the rest of the field. It's kind of, you're not playing to your strengths. And I think for the Lions, we're very much a confidence team. And to kind of, I don't know. Yeah, it's a weird one. But I think that despite how teams have been setting up against us to kind of negate our game, we're making it easier for them to do that.
Make sure you follow us on socials. Just search for BL Fancast.
Why is our sub? Yeah, like, Cal Archie had no touches. Why are we not using it in a way that you see other teams use it? Every other team seems to have their sub come on and like they look like a rabid caged animal, and it seems like ours comes on looking like they've already. I don't know. I didn't even bloody notice Kalachi on the field, but like most of the time, our sub tends to come on the field as if they've played the same amount of game.
It's
like,
it's a
weird.
strange one because we've quite often Fags won't, unless Poole called in case of emergency, he won't make the sub until there's 10 or less than 10 minutes left in the game. And it sort of doesn't give that player enough time to figure out, I guess, the tempo of the game, how it's unfolding, and sort of what they need to do to contribute to the structure. Obviously, they've been sitting there watching it for 3 quarters, and we'll find out. And we'll have their own assessment from there. But it was strange. Like, Kalachi didn't come on until sort of 8 minutes to go in that game. And by the time he does, it's like, well, you've got 5 minutes to sort of figure out exactly where you sit in this, because you're coming off for Fort, who is playing third tall. That's obviously not going to be your role, so we're going to have to shuffle some stuff around. Yeah, it's almost just like Fags forgets about it. It's like, oh shit, yeah, that's right, we got a sub there. Yeah, put him on.
Do you reckon that, like, and I don't know too much about how the other AFL teams are treating this. If I was coaching, I'd be pulling the trigger on the sub midway through the third quarter. Like, I know that seems a bit odd.
Yeah, no,
but the idea of letting a player grow into the game for the last quarter, it's an extra player. It's a fresh set of legs. And it's like, when you've got, like, very rarely would you have the 23rd player be such a vast drop-off from your 22. Like, you can't imagine that it's going to be, like, me as the sub playing. Like, I'm going to be garbage. But it's an AFL player. Like, they should be able to come on and be about as good as everybody else anyway. But they haven't played and they're going to be fitter. So by, like, that metric, they're going to be more impactful. Like, is there going to be room for, like, players that are sort of almost like impact sub type players, which you get in other sports? It just seems a bit weird. Like, that, it's like they they haven't grasped the concept of what a sub can be. It's a tactical sub. Like, it's a sub to change the tactics to, make your team better, not to, like, I don't know.
I agree, and I guess that's why we've sort of almost always gone for versatility when it comes to the sub. Sort of Answorth, who can play multiple positions, even in the midfield. Archie, as was sort of chosen as the, I guess, the paradigm as a sub because he's been played all over the ground. It's just, are they too scared to sort of roll with that in case there is an injury? And you're like, well, shit.
Yeah, but if it's an injury, it's fine. You just play them anyway and you change your structure the way that you're kind of doing. Like, I'm not sitting here saying, like, I don't think that Kalachi can't be an impact sub. I think he can, and he's shown that he's impacted games from the beginning in other times he's played. But it's like, give the guy a bit more opportunity. Like, we saw Kadeem Coleman come on and actually sort of look like he gave a shit last week. But there's been so many times where just the subs come on, gotten like 4 touches, played none of the game. And it's just like, well, you're not even utilizing the system, let alone abusing the system. So I don't know. It seems weird, but
well, that being
what
said,
is the sub?
Yeah, well, that being said, let's get into our changes because just listening to all that, I've chosen my sub for next week.
Have you picked Dane Zorko?
No. You know what? Actually, he would probably be a bloody handy sub.
Mitch Robinson out of retirement? Like, just
honestly,
as a sub.
If you just imagine that we make a grand final and then Mitch Robinson comes on in the third quarter and just creates chaos. Gets a 48-week suspension, but we get the win.
Yeah. But, like, what if you're a player, like, that is... like, imagine if you're a contracted player like Mitch Robinson, you go, I'll play on another year, but I'll only ever be the sub. Like, is that useful, or have I lost my mind?
I don't know that it's useful. I don't know that you've lost your mind either. I think it's somewhere in the middle there.
6 of one, half dozen of the other kind of thing, I suppose. But all right, changes.
Well, the obvious ones to potentially come back in are McCluggage and Zorko. Now, who's going to come out for them is the question. I think Jasper Fletcher's going to be unlucky as the last in, first out sacrificial lamb there. Because he did nothing. Like, no one did anything to get dropped. Maybe McCarthy is looking at a week off, but I also don't think so either. I don't think anyone did enough to get dropped. And like I said, I'll be pretty upset if Dev gets dropped because he's had 2 really good games, but sort of Fletcher and Dev are the like for likes, I guess.
Yeah. So you reckon those 2?
Unfortunately, yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
I'm keeping Frog in until he does not just not until he has a bad game, until he has a stretch of like 3 or 4 bad games.
I guess like Fort's reliable. They'll probably keep him in there. Fair enough. It was odd. Like it was odd to hear Fagan talk in the press conference about giving Fletcher a game. Like we gave him a game. It's like, to me, he should have, like, he earned that game. It should have been he earned that game, whether or not he goes in out. He showed a lot. Yeah, particularly in the second half, he grew into the game. It was actually his first touch, Fletcher's, where he didn't get a disposal, but the ball kind of looped up hospital style, and he had to take some body as his first act. It was like, okay, this guy's pretty legit. He does kind of look a bit like a generic sim child, but there you go. I'm padding.
It's a tough one this week. It's a tough one this week.
Yeah,
because
I probably got Fletcher and Lohman coming out.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Like, because is Lohman a longer term option? Probably, but like
I thought the way in the second half, as a young player especially, that could almost be forgiven for blazing away trying to kick their first goal. He had options to do that, but he lowered his eyes and picked out Dev. There was another one that he picked out as well. We got 3 goal assists, so that's pretty impressive. Yeah, I thought that showed a little bit of team first maturity from him. So I thought he had a good game. But yeah, I guess we've just got a lot of that type of player. Rayner, Bailey, McCarthy, Chuck, Lohman, and then if we're bringing Zorko back into that, and Dev Rob can play sort of mid forward as well. So
also that mark by Lohman was pretty good as well. The one that he kind of unabated just slimed in from the side. Yeah, maybe it's a situation where Zorko doesn't get up. Yeah, probably Jasper comes out, but it doesn't necessarily mean that he'll be out forever.
If there's one thing we've seen especially this week, is that we've got some good young players that can not only plug holes but actually contribute to a winning team as well. So it's good signs for the future especially if we can hold on to them. Dev in particular. The other sort of wait and see is Jack Payne. Obviously, that ankle was giving him grief throughout the game. So if he's pulled up pretty sore and can't sort of walk on it, that may be an issue. I don't want to have to deal with, as I said, with Max King running around. So, yeah.
Dara Joyce to have a blinder against his old side. Oh, your face, man.
I don't want to have to think about that until I have to,
Yeah. We'll see how that is. We'll do an extra. Nah, we won't do an extra. Screw that.
Like the show? Make sure to follow and subscribe on your favourite podcast platforms.
The VFL back on the winners list in a big way as well. 111 points against the Swans reserves. Our man Jared Lyons, 36 touches. A spate of goal kickers. Blake Coleman, Wiley Buzzer, Shadowbrain all kicked 4 apiece. Fullerton 2 goals, 3. Noz had a good game as well, 27 touches. Jackson Pryor, 25. Kyle Dunkley had a good game. Harry Sharp, 24 with 1 goal, 1. Oh, the other, actually, just to go back real quick, Nakia Cockatoo. He's my sub. I think he's
your sub.
Yeah, I think he's the sort of player that can do those things you were talking about. Come on, make an impact.
Yeah, fair dues. Interesting. So Answorth, I just noticed looking on this thing, he got a quadruple double. Now, I had no idea what that was, but it's interesting. It's getting double digits in kicks, handballs, marks, tackles.
That's a good game.
That's funny.
11 tackles. That's a good game.
So, yeah, funny little thing. Had no idea that metric existed, albeit just for the VFL, but I think they were saying that Dunkley got that against Carlton. Blake Coleman, 4 goals. Shadow Brain, 4 goals. So weird. Love that guy. If he's not like a cerebral assassin, I don't know. He's done something wrong.
VFL's ticking along, albeit it doesn't look like it was hard to have a good game over the weekend against the Swans reserves. So, and with 2 players that were struggling to already get back in the senior 22, I can't see anyone else making the jump up at this stage. Well, Saints next week. It's going to be a tough game. Saints at Marvel. I think this will be a really good test for us, considering our form of late, to come up against a team that is sort of jostling with us for that ladder position and away from home, with some players on Saints that can do some damage. We've already touched on Wilkie, Sinclair, Max King. They can all do their bit here and there. Their midfield isn't fantastic, but they're obviously doing enough to get wins, but they've had a couple of quiet weeks as well. So you've said it from the beginning that the wheels were going to fall off.
I didn't say the wheels would fall off. I just said I thought that they would sort of fade. They'd build up a lot of the stuff early on and they'd fade, and I think that's what I said about them and Essendon. So hopefully proven right, but wheels falling off, definitely not the case.
No, I mean they're hanging in there, and it probably, I don't know, that sort of, there's a lot of teams that will have good patches and then fall down. Like, look at Freo, they were playing some blistering footy for a couple of weeks, and then they just got smacked over the weekend. The Giants, the Cats, Richmond have all sort of had their moments. Even in that game against Port, Geelong looked bloody unstoppable for periods of that match before Port just came back. Bulldogs.
Do you know which team hasn't had their moments? Carlton.
What are you talking about there? They had a big 10-goal win.
Yeah, what was it? I read it was an incredible 59-point victory over Gold Coast at home. Imagine telling someone, a Carlton fan, at the beginning of this year, a 10-goal win over the Suns at home would be described as incredible.
Yeah.
Just for those who didn't listen to our bye episode, we did a bit of a omnibus on Carlton and on Fossey, so check that one out.
Yeah, I cut like 20 minutes of that chat as well. It went on. Hey?
It was garbage. It was somehow we managed just to have like a really depressing conversation for no reason. So
we turned into the Carlton fan cast for a while. Yeah,
it's a Carlton Loathcast.
Yes.
Come on.
I think this will be a really good game Friday night against St Kilda, Marvel Stadium, which we tend to play well at. So, I mean, as opposed to the MCG, our record at Marvel is actually not so bad. Our record against St Kilda is a little bit patchy.
Down there, it's all rightish. I think we won our last 2 down there against them.
They got us at Metricon year before last, maybe, I think.
Yeah. Well, because I remember that game last season was just like a nightmare. It was like one of the worst games of football I've seen. And then Cameron is like, I'm just going to win the game, and kick like 3 goals in the last quarter to win the game. And it was like, far out.
Yeah, with the infamous shush as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, fair enough.
Are you going to be heading along to Marvel?
Yeah, hopefully. I mean, 7:50 is such a garbage time as well, particularly coming from where I am. So it's sort of like every game in Victoria is a 7:50.
How good.
Until the end of the season. It's like, it's almost like a midnight, 12:30 get home. So not great for meeting up any of the Fancast fans after the game, but I will try hopefully to be around the traps earlier on this time. Hopefully I can remember. I
did solicit for questions this week. Not too many
bites.
Crickets. Yeah, which, as I said last week, is probably a good sign, because when we cop a loss like we did against Hawthorn, that's when people want to have their say. So it's good that it's been a little bit quiet on the Western Front. Someone did ask the recommendation for, the best pub to go and watch a footy in Victoria, and I did say the Royal Derby is the place for Lions fans. It's got a lot of Fitzroy heritage there.
I'm too nervous to go to the pub to watch games, hey?
Fair enough. You can always get kicked out. I did have an email at blfancast@gmail.com, and no, I didn't forward it to you again this week, from Jason King, who's listening down in Tassie.
I'm just going to really aggressively type here, so you can see that I'm typing and putting it here, my email address for him.
There you go.
Going forward.
Do you want me to read that out?
No.
Enjoying the podcast, previews, reviews, tend to agree with you both mostly. He did say that the People's List...
That's weird, because I don't agree with a lot of the shit you say, so... What kind of malleable mind have you got?
Can you stop insulting the listeners? Last week you called Ziggy a bastard, who has replied and said, you're also a bastard.
That's fair, yeah.
And now you're calling Jason a smooth brain, essentially.
I didn't call him a smooth brain. I said he had a malleable, smooth brain.
No, thanks so much, Kingy, for reaching out and, of course, listening all the way down in Tassie. He did say a big props to the People's List, because it was dangerously close. So, fantastic stuff. And if anyone wants to get in touch, of course, socials, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Reddit is now back online, although it won't allow me to post videos, which is a bit of a pisser, because I couldn't post that Ryan Harwood Nostalgic Player of the Week video. Hint, hint. Definitely your turn this week. But
yeah. Raking left foots all over it.
Very good. blfancast@gmail.com if you ever want to reach out as well.
Just to rub salt in the wound, Sandy Roberts the whole night called me Big Jeff Brown. Jeff, did he? Oh, no.
Well, who is your nostalgic player for this week?
I've gone for the rakingest of left foot players with hamstrings made of actual string, Josh Drummond. Loved him. Loved him so much. He was unlucky, obviously playing in
94 games.
94 games, 2005 to 2012. Not some great times. Really struggled to get a flow on.
I really like Josh Drummond, hey.
like you could just watch him kick. It was like almost this weird like proto Daniel Rich, but like a bit taller and kind of less blonde, which made it cool. And I think he wore those like quad skins, so it looked really cool. And he also was a bit of a goal threat too. So
I think he is currently working at the Suns because I keep seeing him on the bench. There you go. Yep, he's the defensive coach for the Suns at the moment. Josh Drummond.
Yeah. Well, they had not a good game, so fair enough. Got beaten by Carlton of all people.
It's interesting that you only ever use the term raking for left footers. Hey, I don't think I've ever heard someone having a raking right foot.
Nah, it's because it's got to be like a reverse alliteration thing. So you can't have raking right foot. You could have like a.
But you can have a lethal left foot.
Yes, you can. There's no logic to this. But no, he was great, and I like wish he was a player that you really enjoyed watching.
Yeah.
Or I really enjoyed watching. You know, just the idea of having 700 more kicks in your career to handballs is hilarious. But I like wish to have seen more. You know, it was him just raking left the ball to, that's not how you say that, to Brownie was always good. But yeah, he's someone that probably doesn't get enough credit, but also does he deserve it? I don't know. But I liked watching him play. And I'm nostalgic about it. So I'll start off. So I remember going to a game with my two brothers, and it has to have had been this West Coast 2012 game, because I think we're all sitting there and it's like, we were like, who do you reckon's going to kick the most goals? And it was like, oh, you know, Brown. Maybe it was a different one. I don't know. I've lost my mind. But I'm pretty sure there was a game where like we all were like, who's going to kick the most goals? And my oldest brother said like Brown, the other one said Bradshaw, and I said Drummond. And they're like, what the hell is wrong with you? And they all kicked the same amount of goals, and it was really cool. Cool moment. Maybe I made it up. I don't know. Whimsical, anecdotal bullshit. That's the end of the podcast. Goodbye, fellas. This one's going to be a nightmare cut, I tell you what.
But I do want to leave you on one thing. You little beauty!